All right, good morning and welcome back to the Game Dev Show. I'm here with Jason Storypile and Dave from Warped Imagination, whose logo I've got sitting up on the side because he just released some new assets to the asset store. We're going to talk about a couple of really cool code tips, I think dive into some patterns and some interesting discussions that Story's been having on his Discord for this week, and talk about a couple of really cool assets that Powell is just about to release too. I think you kind of, if you're watching the video with us live, you can see one of them in the background. It looks freaking amazing. So welcome everybody, and thank you for joining us. Anybody want to jump in and say hello first?
Yeah, I just want to say that that new asset he's done, I actually thought Powell had actually gone to hell for doing something bad, and that's where it ended up because, yeah, it looks hot there. It's nice.
That is burning in the lava.
It's where he gets the dark arts. That's where he learns all of his secrets. Tricks of the
Going to talk about clean code today, and Powell didn't do clean code, and they sent him to hell for it.
That's the punishment. Oh, well, anyway. Welcome, everybody. Before we dive into, I think, the key thing, I wanted to briefly share Dave's new stuff because you'd mentioned earlier, we were having a little chat before that you finally started releasing some assets. And I know, like, I don't know, was it 5-6 years ago, you showed me some of your editor tooling, and I was like, you should make Unity assets for the asset store. And you kept telling me you never did because you didn't want to deal with support and all that other stuff, which I totally get, but now you've
in that case, my list of requirements of stuff I want. By the way, I was going to say, if you're making assets, the one I want from you most is my favorite of all the stuff you do is those cool overlays, the conditional ones where you have for like driving the disc one you had for the chair and all those. So if you can make a plugin suite of somehow it's much easier for people to make little module pop-up stuff, I'd buy that. There you go.
Okay, yeah, that's a good recommendation. I like it. People can keep telling me what to make if they're going to buy it. I'm a man that likes making money, so yeah, it's all good. So the first one I put out, yeah, I mean, I went back on my word. I said I'd never do it because support requests just drive me nuts, and I didn't want to deal with other people's support requests when my own companies have support requests. But it's been good. I've had lots of people download it, and I've only had one support request so far, and it was for a very small thing that's going to go out in the next update of that tool, and it's for something that most people don't use, so I won't talk about it now. But let's talk about the two tools.
Yeah, tell them what they are.
So there's a free tool up there, which is the audio preview tool. If you watch my channel, basically what I did is I went through the comments that I got from people on the channel. And a lot of people were saying, you know, I want this, or I want that, or this has been really helpful. And the things that I found, people say they found really helpful. I basically moved those to tool state and then put them up and went through a little process of making it really easy to build tools myself and QA them across all the different versions of Unity, you know, 2020, 2021, 2019. So you'll notice if you look in the audio preview code, there's bits that swap it out for if it's 2019 or 2020 when they change their different classes, etc. Obviously, as soon as
if I ever do make assets, you're not getting that from me, by the way. I do not care that much for, like, so I respect the hustle on that, because if I was making assets starting today, I'm going back one version max. After that, it's your own fault. I'm not dealing with you anymore.
It's because you're a horrible person. No, not really. No, I agree. I mean, the funny thing is some of this stuff has been in my code set. So the tools that I put out don't generally be, I'm going to create a tool for the community and I'm going to build it from scratch and I'm going to put it out there. No, most of this has been in my code repository because I'm lazy and I'm like, other people will buy that. Like Jason said, he looked at some of the tools I've done and he's like, I want that, I want that, I want that. And it's a case of, I'm like, well, I've been using it for 2 or 3 years. I know it doesn't break, or nobody's broken it that uses it from me. So I'm going to put it out there and see what happens. The audio preview tool is the most simple thing. Most people that try and play audio in Unity know that when you press and you select it, you have to then go over to the inspector and then press the little play button there. That's the smallest button they could have possibly made on the inspector on the little preview window. Or you double click it and it opens in a separate third-party app that if you're using Microsoft, it's some random thing half the time and you didn't really.
My favorite is when it pops up an installer for a codec or something.
Yeah.
It
happens
so often.
What a nightmare. Yeah, it's a nightmare.
I use VLC for all of my like normal video stuff, and then I use Spotify for music. So I basically don't have an MP3 player locally. So every time I accidentally double click it, it opens up the native Windows installer, and because I haven't ever used it, it brings up the welcome to installing the Windows installer for Windows Media Player. So literally, it brings up the installer for Windows Media Player when I click it, which is infuriating.
Yeah. And it's a nightmare. And I was having the same issue. So I kind of looked into how Unity do it. And funnily enough, I didn't think this one was going to pass the asset store check when it went out because it uses some of their background code that they don't kind of open up to everybody. So if Unity, you're listening, sorry, but you put it out there now, it's alive. So this thing, basically, you double click on an audio clip and it plays the audio clip. You double click it again and it stops playing the audio clip. You double click on a separate audio clip when one is playing and it plays that audio clip. It is super, super simple. But my God, I needed this tool in my life because I get loads of sound effects from people and I'm like, I want to preview those in Unity easily by just, when you sit there and you go, I need to put in a ding button for a sound, or there's a button click that I want to do and I need that button click to represent the game that I'm making, whether it's sci-fi, whether it's retro, whether it's but then you bring in your library, your audio library into Unity and you've got 20, 30 button clicks. So I just wanted something that I could just quickly go ding, 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 pick it out. And I've basically categorized most of my stuff so I don't have to click a lot, but I click enough, whether it's 1 to 5, I needed this. So I basically made a free tool that did that. The other tool that's out there is the paid tool, which is the bookmarks tool. Now, this is another thing. I've been using Unity, obviously, for 13 odd years or whatever. And the thing that always annoyed me in the scene is if I'm building a giant scene, then I'll be working on one area and I'll be doing something there. And then I'm like, right, okay, I've got to go to this other area. Because let's say you have a troll that's on a bridge that you're dealing with that particular part of it. And then you've got a wizard that meets you by a lake or something, but there's a big, vast open area between those two, and you've got it in one scene. Well, you've got it in one scene, I don't know, but you jump between those particular points, but you're always scrolling out, moving over, jumping in. So I wanted something that I could just snap between those areas really quickly. And then I've also got the case of I make interactions for virtual reality. And those interactions tend to have the scene view really focused in close because they're sometimes complex.
Don't get me started. Like, especially in VR. Because in VR, because the scales are kind of wacky. My favorite thing, I love when Unity does this. When you scroll the camera in on something and you're like here, and you're like, I'm not close enough yet. I need to get a little bit closer. So you press the F key and the camera goes, oh, okay. Just flies back in his face. You're like, thanks. Because
there's no content, there's no collider, there's no mesh that it wants to cage your view into. So it jumps you straight out. So I went, no, I need to have a button that I just click that I can create these bookmarks, then I can click all the way through. So for instance, the turret scene that I have currently, I have a view that I'll jump out to make sure all my VFX look right with the guns that are firing from the side of the turret. And then I'll be like, right, okay, I want to go in and see how my UI is looking. So I press my scene view and it jumps in, and now I can see my UI as it's playing out properly. Or I jump out and I do it over the shoulder third person because I'm looking at all the spaceships flying in that I'm going to be fighting. And when I'm creating my levels, I zoom out so I can see all the paths that the spaceships are coming in on. And I just have one button. I just click all the way through that. So I've been using this tool for a while. And then there's another tool coming out called the Scene View Overlay tool, which I'd done on a video last year, which just literally enables you to change scenes with a drop down in the scene view. So you can just drop down, pressing it, I'm in the other scene. Drop down, pressing it, I'm in the other scene. Or
I stole that, but I modified it for a few features that I thought it was missing. So here's one that I think I recommend. Specifically the label of it, when you have it like dragged and docked in the corner, I changed the label to the active scene. So it literally just says, this is what scene you're in if you're looking for the name real quick. That's a really nice like quality of life for it.
Yeah, and this tool has something around that sort of thing because I found that as well. I was pressing on the same exact thing.
The other one I added too for myself is one of the projects I'm in has multiple people, and so they're divided up by departments. You've got the art department, the sound team, whatever.
Oh, interesting.
And people are making different experiments. And so what I did is I wrote a class which will, as it's building that, read the folder structure and then rebuild not the whole folder structure, but it builds a thing where I can register. I can say, this little filter. If the file path contains the word audio, fmod, or whatever, move it into the fmod subfolder in the list. So I don't get a cloned copy of the folder structure, but I get like there's the 4 I care about, and I can just move things into them. Everything that's labeled as test or experiment get moved to the same thing, and it only shows scenes that are labeled with the project name. So no matter what projects I have, it'll show all project ones filtered by the category, and it makes it really handy if someone makes a new experiment and says, hey, we're working on the audio thing, can you go check that it integrates with your shader? I can then just go drop down audio experiment 7, whatever, and I don't have to go looking for whatever that is. So that's probably overkill, but the general idea of having structures for it is useful.
That's good. I mean, I done it to the point where you can switch between whether it's in your build and whether it's not, so you can get rid of all the test scenes and all the rest. But I think, if you expanded that to have just scenes labeled, so you could label a scene, it looks for that label and says, okay, I'm going to put this in.
That's the number one thing I do first. The very first thing I did when I downloaded your asset is I put a thing on it that said, only show me things that are labeled. Because I really, as much as I like having them, I hate when I look at the drop down and it's like, why do I care about the TextMesh Pro sample scenes? I'm literally never going to. I'll go through,
use them. Yeah.
I'll go through and delete them, sure. But then later on, because it's a large team, you'd have someone install 4 asset packs, and the asset packs have like 12 scenes between them. I'm like, you've just ruined the entire structure of all of the scene drop down. And it's like, because one thing for artists, as much as they're great to have in a project, they never delete assets. They'll download an asset pack that has like 10 gig of stuff, and they'll say, oh, cool, here's the tree I wanted. And they'll just leave those 10 gig in the project, and it's like, and all the other stuff, all of the PDFs, all of the scene files, all of the scripts that no one's going to use, but they're still there. And,
I can say a quick story. We had a client which said, our Unity project stopped working. How? We downloaded all your assets and added them to the project. 80 gigabytes of data.
Yep.
And what's worse, they had, I think it was Asset Pro, one of the assets that showcases you which scenes going to build, which textures go. So these assets, when you add all the assets into the project, it goes to all the assets and makes database of them.
Yeah, and it's these things, it's these little scene view things and everything that really, you kind of wonder why Unity doesn't have some stuff around this. So anyway, I'm putting stuff out into the asset store that has those things in there. So if anybody wants them, they're in there. Go pick them up.
Well, you count me in. Like I said, I'm already literally half the scripts you've done videos on. I added to my project already and modified in some capacity. And then it's also like it's facilitated other ideas I had. Like when I started seeing some of the way you're doing stuff, I'm like, actually, I'm going to take something I was doing before and modify the way I'm doing it. A good example is labels. I use labels all the time, but I never bothered automating them. And when I saw your video on the automation thing for it, I decided to go that one step. In fact, I talked to you about it. I did the whole thing where now I will find the files, I will read through the files, like literally open them, and I'll look for words like the name of the namespace, whether it says the word interface, whether it says the word utility, and I will actively add labels that say this is monobehavior extended, so I know it's a monobehavior type. These ones, and so that way I can do search filters and say which ones of these actually go on objects in the scene versus which ones of these or whatever. And so that makes all future searches and filters I do infinitely easier. So yeah, that's one of the things I stole from your stuff too. So that's another possible candidate.
Yeah, the labels video got a lot of conversation around that because it suddenly people realize, oh, I can organize my things.
I'm the only person doing that. I swear to God, I've never been on a single other project in Unity and anyone I've ever worked with who's like, labels? What labels? The little blue circle. What blue circle? It's like, oh, for God's sake. That feature's been there since 5 or more. Like that's a long time feature that no one has used.
Well, the thing is, Unity, for the good they do and some of the stuff they show with their onboarding, there's a lot of functionality that's just disappeared off. And they haven't bothered to update the old text on it, and you can't find it. So things like labels, they never talk about it in any of their tutorials. It's really for those tools programmers out there to drive through and just start scraping through the API to find these things. I'm lucky in a sense that when I started all the way back, the API was a lot smaller, and as it got added on, you can find it. But if you start right now, it's hard to find these things. For instance, the other day, somebody asked me about whether a particular asset gets put into the build. And I said, well, just look it up on the reporter. And they're like, the what? And I'm like, there's a build reporter system. And it's not obvious to anybody that this build reporter exists. And they're making their own tools around it. And yes, the build reporter is not great. It's not good. It's very bare bones, but it does that job. You can
it'll answer that question for sure.
Yeah. it will tell you exactly what's in your scene. Because if you're worried that you're putting extra stuff in your scene or something you're finding that isn't making it into the scene, that will tell you whether it's really gone into your build or not. So yeah, there is a build reporter system. I've just blown a few people's minds, and you can get it from a Unity Git repository. Oh yeah, it's on a Git
that's
repository.
right. Yeah, it's a good thing to point
not in
out.
the package.
There's a bunch of stuff like that. Like most people don't even know there's extensions to the nav mesh that you have to get separately in a separate location that do more features. It's like all of
In
this
the Git
stuff Unity
repositories.
just hides over there. Yeah.
Because they're not fully fledged, and that way they can say they're very beta, they're very alpha, and they're not in our system. Because if they're in our package system, they wouldn't be that.
As opposed to the robust stuff they have in the exactly.
Yeah, they are. And if you know particular strings, you can actually find things in the package manager that aren't listed in the package manager. It's things like that that aren't very obvious. And I wish Unity would be a little bit more open about that, because they're great systems. They're good stuff.
If there's
stuff
one
you can build on.
If there's one in particular.
Go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead. I was one in particular drives me insane.
What that system is, if you want to talk about it.
That's probably worth talking about, all right, because it is something people don't know about. But I will say, of all of those like hidden mystery packages, the one that drives me insane is at some point when they started adding more powerful web features like the analytics stuff, Unity internally realized their own JSON utility is just garbage. They knew that, and they were like, oh, now we actually have to consume our own stuff. Well, it's not going to serialize half of what we're doing. So what did they do? Behind the scenes, in their own internal tools, they used JSON.NET. Because anybody doing anything with web uses JSON.NET.
Yeah.
And then, but yet, if you type JSON.NET into the package manager, it's like, oh, I don't know what that is. And it's like, but if you do something like install the analytics package, it's dependent on JSON.NET. So if you install analytics, it'll add JSON.NET to your project. But if you just go in and go, oh, I just want JSON.NET, it won't do it. Now, granted, if you know the package name, you can go and do it yourself manually. But the fact that it's like, anybody who doesn't know that and just realizes they want JSON.NET, the trick is go install the analytics package, because then you'll get it even if you don't figure it out. It's stupid, just like silly little things like that.
It's craziness. So yeah, it's one of those things. And what the people want to know what the build reporter system is. It's a build reporter. You build, it puts out a report, and then you can analyze that report for size, for what's gone into it. You can break it down. You can do really rubbish filters.
At the key, it's telling you like all of the assets and how big they are, though, right? And like the percentage of the size, so you can see, and it'll sort them. Like you can see like your largest thing. Half the time, it's some stupid 4K texture you didn't realize was in there.
And that's
like
the
half
thing.
the size of your build, and you go delete that, and you fix your game.
And that's where what most people will come on once they've done enough work in Unity will realize that why has my build suddenly gone up in size? And it speaks to what Story was saying earlier and what Power was saying, where you've put in a package from something and that has loads of stuff with that package that you don't use, but you never delete it. And then suddenly you find that something you've added mentions it somewhere, and suddenly it's added into the entire build. Or it's marked that way, and you didn't ever need it.
Or what is worse, somebody added the package content to lessons folder.
Oh yeah, put it in that resources or
things like that.
So it's the build reporting system is a very useful thing to know about. Seeing as though everybody's talking about it the way they are, I'll do a video on it. So I explain how to get it and how to do it. It'll be a very quick little video to pop up. I'll put on the channel in the next few weeks because it will take me 5 minutes to boot it down and show you how it works. On the asset store stuff, I'm not going to harp on about it too much, but the stuff I'm doing, all the code is there. It's all commented. It's all nice and neat. And the other thing is there are videos. Like they're all related to a video I've done on YouTube. So for instance, the bookmarks tool, that was a video that went out this week. They explained exactly what the bookmarks tool is. And then
I was going to say, because I saw
the code.
I saw that in the asset store and I'm like, wait a minute, I've not seen this. This is not one, because all the other stuff I knew. When you did the audio tool, I heard you talking about it. But when I saw this, honestly, when I saw the scene one, I thought it must have been an asset you had from a long time ago because I'd never heard of it before. I'd missed the window where you'd put the asset up and I hadn't noticed it on the YouTube channel yet.
So yeah, it's up there. There's tutorial videos up there because I'm a completionist. My OCD tells me I need to complete every last tick box when I put something up. So if you didn't want to pay for any of these assets, you don't have to. Just go and watch the videos, see how it's actually built, and then copy the code down. It's all going to be there. And one of the reasons I wanted to put them on the asset store is some of the stuff is too big for a single video. So for instance, if I was to go through everything that built the bookmarks tool, and that's sub assets, that's thumbnails from the scene view camera, that's scene view alterations and all the rest. It'd be a 2-hour video, 3-hour video, and nobody watches those. I don't know why you people don't watch it, but nobody watches a 2-hour video. And I know why you don't, because I don't. So it would be a 4-part video. And that's the thing. They're going to be 4-part videos, some of these tools, and they're all going to come out. And the scene view tool that's going to come out in the next couple of weeks, that's already had videos out there to do with it. The other video I put up this last week was another tool that I might be putting out there, which is the snap rotation tool. Now, this is something that a lot of other applications actually have, and I'd forgotten about it until I started using Cascadeur, the sort of AI-assisted animating thing. I've been using it to have a play with. I'll put out a video on that coming up soon. But I wanted to have very custom animations for, funnily enough, zombies, because I'm a big FPS fan. So zombies moving around scenes and interacting with the scenes. So not just you get the animation that comes with the zombie pack and they can idle around, but then they walk up to a wall, they stop, they turn, they idle around. And if you're a good programmer, they'll turn beforehand, it'll look a little bit cleaner and all the rest. But I wanted them to be a little bit more active. So I want them to bump into the wall and then move forwards, and to have set pieces for some of these zombies that come into the world. Not all of them will have that, because there'll be lumbering ones, but the ones that are super fast and jumping over stuff, I wanted them to jump over stuff and to do it cleanly. You could do some of this stuff procedurally, but if I'm going to have them jump over a set of stairs, like a banister on a set of stairs, or I'm going to have them bump into a particular corridor in several angles, you could do some of that procedurally, but if you customize it, you can have them fall in partway through, or do that little trip and the little nuances. So I wanted a tool that enabled me to do that quickly, and animating that stuff, if you've ever done that, takes a long time. So I've been using Cascadeur and it's working out quite neatly. But to go back to the point, when I was using it, I noticed they had a snap view thing. I was like, I've used this before in another thing. And all it is you press a hotkey and you swipe your mouse and it snaps 90 degrees. Horizontally and vertically, and you could snap around your thing really easily, and it's really quick and super simple to create. So yeah, I knocked up a hacky version of that, and there's a video out called Mastering Scene View Snap Rotation on the channel that shows you how to do that as well and break it down so you can literally snap around things. And it's really good if you're doing animation. It's quite particular to that, because you want to see a character from the front, see how they look from the front. Okay, now you want to snap and see how they look from the side, from the top, just to get their profiles right. A lot of tools have a silhouetting feature where it blacks everything out for the character, so you can see their profile against other things, and you can work out whether that animation looks correct. But you're working on products, you're working on barrels, you're working on something else. It's a useful tool to basically snap around things. So I put it in there, and there's a video up if you ever fancy doing that. You can just, again, the code is really simple. You can copy and paste it down, and that might make a free tool in the future.
Yeah, it sounds pretty interesting. I think the Cascadeur part sounds even more interesting, though. You're finding a lot of value out of that. So you just give it your models and your environment and tell it kind of what to do, or you tell everybody what that does?
Yeah, so basically, in a nutshell, AI-assisted animation does things like auto-posing. And so let's say we're working on a character. I'm not going to say if you've done this. If you're working on a character and you move the elbow up, the hand will kind of rotate with it and all the rest of it. And if you select all the vertices or the joints or whatever, and you start moving these around, they'll move. But it takes a long time to get those nuances right, where you're moving things into position and all this. And a lot of time you're looking at it and going, is the physics right on this? Because your character's leaning really far forwards and their feet are all the way back. In real life, they're going to fall over, but they don't fall over in your animation, because that's how you're doing it. And you might want that. But what Cascadeur does is it auto-poses and uses physics auto-posing. So if I move my character so they lean forward, the animator, the AI assistant, will start moving joints into place so that they look like they would be moving forwards, or their center, the center of mass of them, is over their feet, or they'll move a step forwards because the foot should be forwards at that particular position. You can do a whole walk cycle by setting 2 frames like this. At one point, that's how I'm going to look, and that is how I'm going to look when I finish, and it will do the auto posing between it. And once you've put in a couple of keyframes to give some nuance and all the rest, you then look at the physics simulation that it's got of it, and there's this. there's a little bit of movement in the shoulders. The head's kind of got a little bit of a bob to it. And you can tweak those and change those and get those to the way you want. But it does it really quickly. Now, would this give you perfect results every time? No, it won't. But it will get you most of the way. I mean, a lot of times it will. But it's so much quicker to do. And
it's also infinitely better than the alternative. Like a great example, a much simpler version of this problem, which drives me insane because I see it all the time, is when junior developers want to like place stuff around a space. Like a good old fashioned, oh, there's some bottles on the table. And you see them going in and like, just, okay, it looks vaguely like it's tilted on the corner of that table. And they're trying to like place things in a way that organically looks sort of littered on a table or dropped coins or something. But there's an asset on the store, and you can write your own. It's like 6 lines of code. But there's an asset that does this, where you just put this coins in and say drop them, and they just physics drop onto the space, land on the tables and stuff, and then it doesn't put rigid bodies on them. But if you want to litter a space with organically placed things that look like they've fallen or tilted, the amount of times I see somebody who's placed a like precariously tilted apple on the side of a table, and it's actually like so obviously manually hovered and placed, and it's missing because they didn't actually align it to the table surface. Just yeah.
I know you go up in VR and you just keep trying to push it back. This is going to freak me out. And if you're looking at Cascadeur and all the rest, that video that I put out there's a link in the description. It's an affiliate link, but it's got a code and it will give you an extra. I can't remember how much, but it gives you a percentage off because I reached out to Cascadeur and said, I'm going to be looking at your tool and giving it some assessment and probably putting a video out on it. And they said, right, here's an affiliate code for anybody that wants to use it. So it's not an expensive tool in the grand scheme of things. If you do any sort of character animation, it's a tool you want because, as I say, you can get so far so quickly and then take it in and do a little bit of extra stuff on it. So I recommend it at the moment. I will do a bigger video showing how I built a zombie that jumps onto a truck bed and then crashes through the window to attack a child that's in a car. I'm warped imagination for a reason. It's for a bigger project that I have coming on. I don't just like having zombies attack people. But I'll show you what I did to do that and how I then brought that into Unity and then used it for these set pieces. If you're building cutscenes, this is a friggin' must. Like it's a really, really cool piece of tool. But yeah, there's an affiliate link and a code to get a load of money off if you decide you're going to buy it. They've got a free tier that enables you to put out 300 frames, and that's pretty good. You can get a whole series going so you can see how it works. It's not one of these free tiers where it's like, we'll let you work out how to use the tool and it works at the end, and then you get to the point where you're like, right, I'm gonna export this.
Yeah, no exports are saving.
Oh, no exports. It's like, oh no.
Everyone who does that should go straight to Pal's Pit. Anyone who does these projects where you download an asset, you go through the whole process. You're like, do I want to use this? Let's try it. And you get to the save and the save button's grayed out or something. It's like, that's a shadow ban right there. Yeah. Do not do that to people.
Yeah.
Put a watermark, fine. But if you don't let me save all the fucking work I just put into this thing, trialing your project, I will never buy it. That's an instant. Even if it was the best project in the world, I will never buy it if you do that to me.
Because if I don't know how it exports and appears in the tool, the final thing I'm going to use it in, I don't know whether it works, because a lot of these animation tools, you export it and then it's like, oh, Y isn't up, Z is up. Now I have to do a little bit of extra alteration on this thing to get it to look nice, because now my zombie's walking straight up. Or, oh, it's all root motion and I need to turn that off, or I need to change this, or I need to tweak this. I need to know how it's going to fit into my pipeline because I'm a busy person and I can't be doing loads of alterations afterwards. And they give you that ability to export it and try it and put it into the scene and see how it all works and tweak some of the things. Yeah, there's a cap, but it's a cap that you can work out, because obviously they're not going to give you the tool and say, right, you could do everything you want to do for free. That's fine. I just need to know that every part of that pipeline is finished and working and clean. And they give me that. So it's a thumbs up from me so far. See how well it does when it starts doing banister jumps of zombies and stuff like that. But at the moment, jumping onto a truck worked out quite nicely.
Yeah, and then, the pricing is pretty good too. It's not bad, like you're saying. It's $30 a month for the pro one. So
yeah, it's really tidy. And obviously, again, with the code, you get a load of money off. So go check that out. There's the salesman in me going at it. And then the only other thing from me this week is I put out a video on one of my companies called Auto Mechanics of the simulator, because everybody's been asking me what's going on with the simulator. So I put out a video that shows the simulator actually working and a small little tiny trailer. It's business to business. It's not business to consumer. So the trailer is very much focused towards business. So it doesn't match all those indie trailer guidelines that you hear about. Oh, there's action here. There's not action there. Don't care. Business to business, not business to consumer. So don't take my words from another thing where I've gone, this is how you make a trailer work so it sells in marketing, because this is not a consumer-based play. Just so you know, it does have the action bits in it, obviously, and it's a little bit tweaky and all the rest. But this is something I've been working on for the last few years in the background of doing all the other stuff that I do. And it's a full motion simulator with articulated arms that you can get in and ride, and you use the hands and shoot stuff. I wish I'd lightened up the scene, but in VR it's actually quite light, but should have lightened up the trailer a little bit. I'm always dark with my trailers. I don't know. It's obviously my mindset. But it talks about, how I build real force on stuff and the patented design around the articulated arms in the simulator. And it has the trailer of the project you can actually play. It's now fully playable in one single level that's not very leveled, but it does the job for what I wanted it to do. So this went out this week as well for business stuff that I'm not going to go into. But yeah.
I said just link that in the description too, so people can go watch the entire thing. I mean,
and I'm not keeping the channel secret. It's a company. I have two companies. One's Warped Imagination and one's Auto Mechanics. Auto Mechanics is a group of people that I've gotten close to and know through years of working on stuff. I've worked with the hardware engineers on Old Sparky, which is where I electrocuted people for fun. And then I worked on another project. I was just about to say what it was. Can't talk about that because it's super NDA. But I worked on with the concept design and concept artist Gurmukh Basin. Super amazing. He used to teach at Noman and all the rest, and he does all the art style behind that. But we work together, and we are contractors that have enough in our day lives that we just wanted to build some crazy stuff. So that's where Auto Mechanics comes from. What happens to it, I don't know, but we'll see.
Okay. Well, everybody should go check out Dave's assets. I'll link them one more time in the chat. Go grab them. Go grab the free one at the very least, but I'll go grab the other one. Support Dave's thing and then
review them.
Review, yeah.
Review them. You don't understand.
Good reminder. I always forget to do that myself. So I'm very bad. So don't worry. I've purchased it. I will review it. I'll remind me if I forget, because I will do it.
Unity stopped doing the simple rating system or something. Now you have to review to rate. If I remember correctly, I saw this.
Yeah,
and it used to be that case. Pal, you could talk to this more.
Yeah, Unity gave that you have to review to give starts to it. It happened, I think, 3 or 4 years ago. And to be truthful, I think it was a good decision. There were too many review bombs from different groups or different asset store sellers. Yeah, we had some words before in asset store sellers. They review bombed each other, so you need to step up and give you info that you have to give a review. Yeah, but it still happens. Yeah, but now Unity knows why someone gives you 1 star. We had for example, if somebody takes the same review, copies it into all of our assets, and gives it 1 star, it already know why it happened. Yeah, so
and you have to install the package. You have to install the package and use it to then be able to review.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that, but it makes sense, I guess. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Also, wishlist. I don't know if that is option to give this hat next to the asset that is mostly working like the wish list from Steam, yeah. So then when you're looking for asset store, the people also see that the people are wish listing it also. So these two
see all the hearts on there.
Yeah. So it's favoriting / wish listing and giving reviews. That's the 2 most important things on asset store right now.
Yeah, so after this, make sure you've wishlisted all of the Nature Manufacturing Infinity PBR stuff, and if you're feeling so kind, maybe my things.
Yeah, I just went and hit the heart 1 second ago, adding to my favorites.
I will say though, it's an interesting topic with reviews, because if you do if you look at the research on reviews as a concept, like not Unity, not specific, just like how people do it, how people make decisions around them, you realize that in anything, whether it's games, movies, product, doesn't matter, reviews follow this really interesting pattern. The only people who ever review anything are people who love things and hate things. The majority of people who are pretty confident going, oh, that was good, I quite like that. So even if something skews positively, you have to go out of your way to do a review. So reviews can actually be really misleading. So they're only useful either for like someone who absolutely raves about a product or someone who absolutely despised it. And normally the one reviews are the ones where people couldn't get it to work for their project. So they're more vocal. So statistically, it's every single review system is skewed toward negative reviews, specifically on the lower end. And it's really frustrating because like most people do this. Most people like, there's so many assets I use a lot that are really good, but they're not my top 10. And so I've reviewed all my top 10 because they've like left an impression on me. All the other ones are good and they probably deserve it. But me, like everyone else in the entire world, you just passively go, oh, it's good. People know that, I guess. You don't think about the fact that like that's the lifeblood of lots of people that they need those reviews. And so, yeah, it is fascinating. I completely changed my perspective on it when I did the research and learned how like, oh, I have to engage with this stuff to be fair to the systems that actually benefit me.
Yeah, and I think some of the positivity of having Unity, you have to load the package up, you have to try it, and then you can review it to remove review bombing and all the rest, is great. The only problem I have with it is the friction for then somebody going back to remember what asset they bought and then loading up that page and then reviewing it and then rating it. As you say, Jason, it's only the people that really love it or really hate it that are going to go on and do that particular method. Whereas you see things like the Google Play Store where they're like, are you enjoying this? Do you want to leave a review? You can do it right here. It's right here. There's a box and there's some stars. You can review it right here. We know you're playing it. You're enjoying it, right? You can do it here. It certainly can be annoying to do that sort of thing. But if you can dismiss that box the first time it comes up so you never see it again, great, because then you can review it right then. It's low friction to then benefit the people that are building the assets or building something else to do it.
To Mark, who's saying no prompts, here's an unfortunate truth about the world. And this is just something you have to realize. I despise them myself. I absolutely hate any and all pop-ups. The worst, in fact, actually, personally, if there's anything I could remove from the face of the earth, it would be in YouTube videos, people doing calls to action saying, don't forget to like and subscribe. Because there's this meta-narrative, everyone has to do it. But the truth is, even if you hate it, even if you absolutely hate it, both as a person doing it and a person watching it, the numbers don't lie. If you do a call to action roughly every like 30%, 20% of your video, even the people who hate it, disproportionately, you will get 3 to 10 times more engagement on your video, which drives everything else forward. So the problem is nobody likes them, but the entire world is incentivized to do it. And the truth is you have to figure out, like, if you don't engage out of anger at the pop-up, you're only hurting the people who you actually like if you do like their stuff, because they have to do it anyway. That's just the way the world works. And so rather than be angry at the system, just look at it more as a case of at least engage with it when it's directly relevant to stuff.
Yep. The point is like right now and subscribe.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah,
put a pop-up. Get a pop-up up there.
Yeah, Jason, I see the Millie House comment. How about you just make a good asset? Yeah, that's not enough. Yeah, mostly from what we can see on our assets, we have many 5-star assets. We will have one on 200 downloads, one review, or something like that. Yeah. So no, and mostly of these reviews come from our support when we ask personally people who we are giving support to give us a review for that we gave them lots of support. Yeah. So most of our assets wouldn't have as many reviews if we didn't actively ask for them.
That's the other thing too. This is another thing. Again, if you read the studies on this, it's fascinating. Products which come out broken can often lead to better reviews because of that exact reason that you're describing. If you release a product that's too good, nobody has a particular reason to ever have a problem with it, and so they're never forced to engage with you. And a lot of reviews are people feeling positively towards the developers because they felt a personal reaction because they helped out. And so if you never had a problem, you never had to contact the developer, you would never leave a positive review. So a lot of products genuinely actively have little things in them on purpose so that you will end up going to them. They'll be really friendly to you, and it's a low-cost engagement to up their rating system. And like they do this a lot with products that will ship you out stuff Like, you know, when you buy products on Amazon and stuff and they give you like random crap in the box you never asked for? That's why. Because it's a small thing. But to them, the engagement is you'll have to contact them and say, oh, what's this? I said, oh, you can have it. You just keep it anyway. They're like, oh, that's nice. And they're like upping their review numbers. So this is like a meta game. It's crazy. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think to answer the comment, I don't think Cyberpunk meant to do it that way. It's a little bit too bad to go for the reviews and get hate bombed as much as they did.
That was a risky strategy if they did, because that they.
But I agree with Mark in a sense. If you can't dismiss that pop up and it pops up every time you use it, you are hurting yourself, because somebody's going to hate you just because that's coming up. You have to enable these things to be dismissed. But the fact that they're there is for a reason.
It's a when matter. Like what you said is very, very important. It is a matter of when. Really clever systems actually do this through analytics. Like literally the game is tracking you and they will wait till you're engaged with the game. They will give you a reward. They will literally give you some unlockable on whatever else. And when you're at your peak happy about the game, that's when magically the pop-up shows up and it's like, yeah, you know what? I am feeling good about this. So like, it's the ones that bombard you are actually the ones which are the lower end games, because it's people who just put in the like, we'll just press the spam button because it's easier. If a game actually does it cleverly, you can do it at exactly the right moment to get peak engagement. There's an entire companies that have software as a service platforms that are designed to analytically watch your players to give you the right moments to ask for engagements to double your engagement revenue, which again sounds very dystopian, but the truth is it works. Like your likelihood to buy something on the asset store, if it's a game with like cosmetics, is directly proportional to how predisposed you are to cosmetics. And so if they put you in matches with people with cosmetics that then makes you feel like you've lost out, then putting in that advertisement at that moment, you're twice as likely to click the button. So you're always being played. That's just the nature of this industry. The trick is to understand when and where, and to, you know, fight back by using the powers for good, right? So be informed about this stuff so you know when to engage and when not to engage.
So I've built a few freemium games in my time. Love them or hate them, they're there and they're going to stay. And it's just how evil you want to be when you're building freemium games as to how good that stuff comes, what you track, what you A/B test, and all the rest. So when we did one freemium game that got over 20 million downloads, it was a big title on iOS and Android. The way we looked at it and A/B tested was from a sense of, we want people to obviously pay for stuff in the actual store, but we don't want to be to a detriment to what they're playing. They can finish the game completely free, but you can up some experience by having some of these particular freemium items. And if you're building a game like that, where you want to put it out for free, but you want to make some revenue on the side of it, but you don't want to be friggin' evil by saying, hey, well, you can't play anymore because you've run out of fuel for today. Come back tomorrow, or you can buy the fuel. It's right there, right there. You don't want to do that. And think about it how you want to, as whether you find that okay or not. Then you need to do A/B testing, and you need to look at the analytics to tell you when you should be advertising this stuff to people, to show them they can have a heightened experience, or they can have these cosmetic changes to the game that will be good for them. Do you want to be driving a Ferrari or a Bugatti? Turns out they are exactly the same speed and acceleration in the game, but you might be a Ferrari fan over a Bugatti fan or something like that, or this nondescript car that we have up on the side here. So when you show that to a player, it's not at the very beginning, you're about to get the sports car. Do you want to have the Bugatti or the Ferrari? Give them a little bit of a taste. So you let them play as the sports car, as the nondescript sports car. And you find out if they like that. Are they going to come back and play again? And when they come back to play again as that sports car, then you turn around and say, you know what? If you're a fan of these things, you can do this aesthetic change that makes no difference to your gameplay or the experience you have in the game. It's just an aesthetical change that means that you'll enjoy driving a Ferrari or a Bugatti rather than this nondescript sports car. But just to point out, if you do put Bugattis and Ferraris in your game, you better have the IP license to do that. They will come down on you like a ton of bricks, which is one of the problems with the asset store as well. It's a different conversation. But the fact you can download these things that are real life things, and then people go and put them in their game and like, I've got a Ferrari in my game now. Yeah, best of luck if you've got that logo everywhere. But yeah.
Cool. Well, if you guys are up for it, I wanted to jump over to the code topic in a second. Dive into
Pal's assets.
Oh, yes. We should mention those and talk about those. Before we do, can I briefly pop up the video and show them? Let me show it, and then let's talk about what's going on there. All right, it's very, very pretty. I want to be able to talk at the same time, though, so I'm going to have to pull them up side by side. So, Paul, you want to just tell everybody about the lava? Is it? You said the videos were coming soon. Is it just about to release? Where are we at?
Yeah, the asset is finalized. We are now preparing on the marketing campaign, so that's why the video that short video you showcased. Yeah, this week we mostly prepared all these scenes for the videos, for the demo scenes, all the shots from the cameras. So lots of cinemachine testing and checking how everything works. Mostly this is our final test phase and preparing marketing that we should have video by the end of next week. Then just porting and checking if it works on different Unity versions. It will be updated to our older assets. The alpha, it was first released in. No, this is the one or 1 second. I will check which alpha version because we have two. No, this one. I will give you the link. The second link. Yeah, it's for the alpha asset update. We worked on it for 2 years, changing most of the code and writing it from bottoms up. All the assets were reworked, the shaders were reworked. So mostly it's a new asset, but the same. It looks the same as the old one.
All right, so a new version of the lava, supporting all and having all the same stuff though as the old one.
We are, as always, we are adding new stuff, adding new tools, and changing everything so it works better. So it's not only what it was, but there is everything changed to new things and adding additional assets.
It looks so beautiful. I've used your lava stuff before in a couple of things, so I'm always a huge fan of it. I want to pop that up there. There we go. It made it bigger. I had my screens all messed up, but everybody can go check it out. When's the so when is all the new marketing stuff going to be done with it? What's the
we will
timeline?
finish the video by the end of next week, and then we will be, I think, 2 weeks to release. Yeah, because we have everything ready up.
Nice. Well, it's gonna be exciting. I like I said, I really love it. I even played with a couple of VR projects in the lava cave environments, and it's super fucking cool. Like, it just looks badass, and you're looking at it in there, and it makes you feel like hot, even though I'm just sitting there in VR. I'm probably sweating too, but so let's see. I had I got a promo video I got to remember to play before we jump over to the other thing. So I'm gonna hit that right now. It's for the upcoming conference in about a week and a half. So I'll hit that, and then we'll dive into some clean code stuff. Guild Conference is right around the corner, starting on May 1st. It's a 5-day conference that offers everything an in-person conference does. We have dozens of sessions on a variety of actionable topics you can use in your own projects. Many of the Game Dev Show experts will be there, along with tons of other speakers like John Riccatello, the CEO of Unity, Rick from GameDev TV, Thomas Brush, Turbo Makes Games, Chris Lucian, Jabrils, and many more. We also have a full virtual expo hall for you to connect with and network with all the other attendees, speakers, and sponsors. In addition to our Pro Pass, which includes over $2,000 of free bonuses, and our Student Pass, which gives you access to all of the sessions, we've just announced a completely free 1-day pass, which gives you access to all of the sessions on the first day. So go check it out, grab your free pass, and join us on May 1st by clicking the link in the description. All right, it's always weird hearing myself like reading a script, especially when it's one that like I didn't actually write all the words. So I hear myself afterwards. I'll record them, and it doesn't sound as weird. But yeah, watching it with the edit always.
It's funny how you can tell. Like I was very proud of myself the very first time someone commented on a video that it didn't sound like I was reading from a script. And I've now, I can now tell the difference. I can now make it not sound like I'm reading from a script. But it took me probably 2 years of doing video content before it didn't sound like because everyone instantly goes deadpan. And I was like, hello, welcome to the thing where getting it to sound organic is really, really tough. It's very, very hard to do.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And that was a one take one. So it was one where I had I did a last second last night. And Andreas cut and edited it up. He wrote it. Of course. But hopefully everybody now knows that there's a free 1-day pass and they can go check it out and come to the conference. That's the goal. And if it got the message across, that's good enough. So before we went live, I briefly kind of mentioned the kind of core of the topic that I wanted to talk about, which was really just around giving people some very simple, actionable advice for improving their code. And I was trying earlier today, I was trying to think of the things that kind of make the biggest difference, that require the least amount of explanation or like complicated learning, where it's just like, if you follow at least these simple couple things, it'll make things a lot easier on you. And I had a list of 3 that popped immediately into my head. 2 are very simple and 1 is a little bit more complicated. I wanted to share them and then see if you guys have anything else similar along that vein, or maybe we'll go into I know Jason Story's got a long side conversation related to this that would probably play well. So the first thing on my list, and maybe we'll just take these one at a time real quick and go around them. But the first one on my list, the thing that I think probably makes one of the biggest differences, probably makes the biggest difference out of everything that you can do when you're writing code with the least amount of work, is good naming of stuff. Just properly naming variables, methods, classes, and renaming them as necessary, like making F2 or whatever, control R, whatever your hotkey is, making that your friend, and constantly renaming things when a name doesn't make sense, when a name is inaccurate, change it. Changing the name of the thing so that it becomes accurate and that you no longer have misnamed or badly named things that aren't descriptive. And it seems like one of those things where it's like, oh yeah, that's stupid. It's simple. We just name it, and it doesn't really matter what the name is because I can just go look at what the thing is. But we find, at least what I found, is that when I actually made this like a core tenet of what it did, like, constantly renaming things and refactoring stuff and making sure that I actually cared about the names, not that, this is A1 and that's A2. I know what they are. It doesn't matter. That it made it way easier for me to continue on writing code, way less likely to run into bugs, and way more productive. I don't know about you guys, but I've spent lots of time looking at and debugging code, trying to figure out why the hell this thing doesn't work, just to find out it's because some variable used to be something and now it's something completely different. But I didn't know that, and I've been using the wrong variable because the names got changed around. It's happened to me probably dozen plus times in real big projects. So anybody got thoughts? is there something I assume you guys all agree that naming is super important, but no, other than Dave, obviously. The only important part is that you put an M and an underscore, right?
Don't start that. I'm getting hate speech from people. The amount of people that come on my
I
channel,
did.
like,
I'm not gonna lie. When I went and looked at the source code of the assets, I did sigh a little when I saw that. I'm sorry. That was the one thing I looked at and went, "Oh, Dave, come on."
No,
well,
hey,
those assets do not have M underscore.
No, there was some standard. There was something I looked at, and there was one of those kinds of standards you did. I forgot which one it was.
For the
No, you know what it is? No, it's your constants. Your K underscore. That's the one that gets me. I knew there's like of all the stuff, like you use really good names, it's all very clear, but whenever you do the K underscore, it's just like I I
You
hate that.
die
I
a
don't know
little
why.
bit inside. I know.
Yeah.
I know. It's one of those things. The C habits. The days from coding in
Mine
C
is
and
screaming
C++.
caps.
Yeah.
Every time I've ever gone to any online community thing giving code reviews, someone always comments going, actually, yeah, the standard isn't screaming caps. I'm like, I don't care. That's my standard. I've been doing it. So I get it. Everyone has their particular ones, and that's fine. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, there's a couple of things to point out on the renaming issue. One, obviously, if you go and rename serialized fields, guess what? They're not serialized anymore. So if
Well,
you've
that's why
used them
you
all
let it
over the
do the
place,
refactor, so it adds
Previously
the formerly
serialized as,
serialized
of
as
course,
automatic.
yeah, you have all you've built massive game, and you're like, you know what? I didn't like that particular way that variable's named, that serialized field, so I'm just going to rename it, and suddenly it disappears all the data from all those particular things. But you can name it back, and usually if the data's there, it will lock it back in for you.
Actually, that's caught me off guard once or twice. I didn't even know that was a thing. No, I knew the formerly serialized as, and I knew the whole renaming thing. But what really caught me off guard is I had an object where I named a variable, changed it, and then I named some other variable that was the same type, like an array again as the original name, and all the old data popped back in. I'm like, oh, I guess that was still there.
Doesn't always get rid of it. It sometimes does, and that's the thing. It's sometimes going to be cleaned up, but oftentimes it doesn't. So that will come back and haunt you. Jason just alluded to it. There is another attribute you can put above things called formerly serialized as, and then you can name them differently. So if your designers are using your tools or they're using your components, and suddenly they're like, I don't know what this thing means, and your tooltip's rubbish, well, guess what? Write a better tooltip, and always write a tooltip. And then go in and you can use formerly serialized.
Oh, and for the love of God, please, because this drives me insane. The formerly serialized as attribute is basically a function that remaps a single compile from the old values to the new values. Once it has done that and the values are in the new place, remove the previously serialized as field. It's not necessary, doesn't do anything, and it infuriates me because I look at other people's code and go, oh, apparently at some stage in the past, they named this variable this, and that's an artifact of this code I now know forever because they didn't get rid of this thing which does nothing, has no benefit to the code anymore. So use it once when you do a rename, recompile, go back, remove the attribute, please.
Yeah. The other thing to mention on this, if you're doing larger refactoring or anything like that, there is actually an attribute called obsolete. And this comes from the C#, not from Unity itself. And obsolete can be really handy if you're refactoring a large piece of code because you can refactor in parts. So if you're got some function, you've got some methods, you're like, I can't change those right now because they enable me to do stuff so I could test this new functionality going, but I know I'm going to remove them. You can use obsolete above that method or the variable, class, whatever. And then just make sure you put a description in there because the people that just put the obsolete attribute in and don't write why it's obsolete or anything like that, you will end up in PAL's hell. So basically you can put a thing in there. And if you want to bring it up to the next level, you can actually mark it to error. But
and for example,
that's to do with moving to new libraries or new versions of libraries.
To call Unity out on this, because Unity puts again every time. In the HTTP web request, really good little feature Unity has for their doing web stuff, like textures into web stuff. The old way to do it was .iserror or iserror code or some version of that, I can't remember. But because a lot of old code never gets updated and it still works, Unity has marked that as obsolete, which is fine, and it still works. And if you open an old thing, you'll get a warning to say it happens. But if you're like, oh, my mistake, Unity, I'm more than happy to move to the new standards. So I hover over the iserror thing and go, tell me which one I'm supposed to use instead. And it doesn't. Now, I had to go and look that up separately. That is what you're supposed to do. If you're going to tell me not to use this anymore, write a description to tell me what to use now instead.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's what it's there for. That's what it should be. And if Visual Studio could pick that up and point you to the new thing, that would be even better, but I don't think it does. So, but yeah, that's something to mention. So formerly serialized as and obsolete work when you're doing renaming and when you're changing things around or you need to leave something there. Those are real empowerment tools that you should know about when you're doing that sort of thing.
Can you
naming?
Tell people what obsolete does real quick, just for people that don't know, like what it actually does in your code and your editor experience? If anybody hasn't seen it before.
Yeah, so it's an attribute, and if people don't know what attributes are, Congratulations,
Square Brace thing, like the
you've got some
serialized
learning to do after you've watched this video to learn what attributes are, because they're amazing and you should use them. But
they probably know what they are and just don't know that they're called those. The serialized field thing is
So,
one of your attributes.
Yeah, that's an attribute there.
Instead, right?
So obsolete, put your brackets in, you stick obsolete in there, and then you put in a string that says why it's obsolete and what you should be using, and usually when it's going to be removed, because it's all well and good marking something as obsolete, but eventually you probably want to remove that. So you should tell people this will be removed in version so-and-so of my API, just to let them know
or when
they have a deadline
update or whatever, right?
This thing will be removed. And usually what you'll do when you're doing library updates, so you're creating libraries for large developers and all the rest of it, you'll put it obsolete. You'll say when it's going to be removed, so it'll be serviceable for a time being. But when that thing needs to go, you mark it as error for a version, so that when they use it, it comes up and says, because you put in the description, and then the next variable you put in the attribute is true, to say it's an error. And then what that will do is when somebody then goes to use the code that uses that particular library or anything, they'll get an error in Unity coming up, like you would do if you done a null reference or whatever. It comes up with an error and says, this is basically unusable until you deal with this scenario. And there are good reasons to do that, where you might have removed something, or it broke. It was a big bug. You fixed it all, but it had to be removed, those particular methods, to do that particular thing. So
systems changing is another one. Like I've seen it happen where you've got some system where you get all enemies in a map, and then your game grows, and suddenly enemies are in factions now, and you never want people to engage with the system by going get all enemies, because that doesn't make sense anymore. It's now too big of a game to do that, so you've now migrated over to the faction.get all enemies. And so it starts out by being a soft migration where you do the obsolete and say, don't use this, we'll still do it, but it's not how we want you using the system going forward. But if you've been doing that for 6 months, you're like, okay, you've had your time to do your migrations. We are now turning that off, because that's actually breaking some internal stuff that we want to remove, and we can't do that as long as people are still doing it. And so that's where you make a breaking change, release it to everybody, and say, that's a semantic breaking change. You now have to change back, otherwise. Yeah.
And it's a nice thing when you're doing releases, because you can do a lookup and see where the obsolete's happening, where people are hitting that particular thing. You can go, okay, Jim, go fix your thing. We've told you. You've been warned, and all you've done is you've turned off warnings on the Unity console.
That'll fix the problem usually.
That will fix the problem. You turn off warnings, you never have to see the warnings, and it's
you
amazing.
Just got to turn off errors next.
Yeah, and then you upgrade to a new version of Unity, and it turns out that the warnings are back on, and suddenly you scare yourself half to death because 500 warnings come up. It's never happened with me, obviously, but it can happen. So yeah. That's just a note. But there you go. That's the obsolete attribute. It's a great thing. And the formally serialized as is, as we've explained, you can change the naming of stuff, and it's beautiful.
Cool. Well, let's go on to item number 2 on my list. So I had 3 things. And the reason, unless you got more, did you have more on that day?
I was just about to say, if you're talking about naming, one of the things that drives me a little bit nuts is when I open up a class and let's just say it's called some class. That's what they've named it, or animal or something like that. So let's say you've got animal as your class. And then I go in there and the first variable that's there is animal ID. Like, why are you calling it animal ID? Just call it ID. Like,
every time I see that, I give out to everybody for that. Or, there's so many of these. Gun.fire gun. It's like, stop. Stop doing
The
this.
only place that I will allow an animal ID and think it's okay is if it's in a field that's mapping to a database where those column
foreign
IDs
key
are
relationships.
already...
Perfectly fine.
Yeah, fine.
Perfectly
fine.
fine.
Yeah, that's okay. But most people in here are going to be doing
That's
They're going to be doing them in their game objects, and they're going to be driving me nuts because I'll be like, no, why? Just
and the other one too. There's a friend of mine, Evan. You know who you are. And this, I
calling him out by names. Jeez.
I
Friend of mine, Dave.
he knows that. So and so and so and so.
He knows this. I made fun of a lot for it. But he used to call his things something object, capital O object in the name of the objects. Yeah. And I just remember once going, "Why is it called that?" And he's like, "What do you mean? Why? Like, explain to me why it's called that." Well, it's an object. I'm like, "What's the word that's like either side of it?" Yeah, okay, there you go. Like, it's just the fact that it adds 0 semantic value. To be clear, names are not pointless. Names are not there randomly. Like a lot of people put names in it because they. It's like I could go on a whole rant on that. I won't because I know Jason has more topics, but I'll just very briefly say.
Keep going. Keep going, Jason person. Tell Dave
If,
person about this.
if you don't, I'm going to give you something else you're definitely going to rant on about naming.
Oh god. Okay. Well then let me just say the point for names is you name things to get information across. That is what they're for. But people often put the wrong names for the wrong information. You don't name things based on what you're doing. You name things based on what it's meant to somebody else. It's informative to somebody looking at it. If someone looks at a thing and they don't know what it is, they're like, what does that do? The name should be what is it? The methods should be what it does. There's a reason why it's noun, verb. That's the general consensus on most object-oriented designing names. Dog.bark. What is it? It's a dog. What does it do? It barks. So anytime there's a word, ask yourself exactly why that word is added to that thing. The word dog is there to tell you it is a dog. The word bark is there to tell you it barks. If it's dog object isn't giving you any information. The fact that it's an object modifies no part of your understanding of how to engage with or use that object. So similarly, if you've got gun.fire gun, it's a gun, so that tells you it's a gun. Fire tells you it's an action it's firing. Gun reminds you it's a gun, right? So it's not just arbitrary. The point is that each word semantically adds something. It's purposeful in intent and why it's there. So that's how you should think about this. When you name things, think about them in terms of literally what is the information each word is getting across to the thing I'm doing. With one caveat, and I want to be fair to people because this is the other part of it. If you start doing this like I do, and you're particularly self-destructive on how you name things, everything has to be perfectly right and analytically correct, you can often freeze and stop doing any productive work because you're like, this doesn't have a good name yet, so I'm going to sit here for 2 hours until I figure out what this is. Don't do that either, because the truth is, an object's name is derived from what it does. And if the object isn't finished being written yet, you don't know what it does. So you don't know a good name. And so the cart before the horse problem. So a tip is what you should do is you're allowed silly names in one scenario, in my opinion, which is when you first start making a thing, like I'm about to make a thing that's going to handle the shooting in my game. I don't know if it's a controller. I don't know if it's a game manager. I don't know if it's an armory. I don't know if it's an inventory. I don't know what it is yet. It's a gun thing. So I'm going to call it gun stuff or shooty stuff right now because I have no information further about how this engages. And once I start that and I start building it out, there's some point I'll hit where I'm like, okay, I've just written add gun, remove gun, whatever. It's now a repository of weapons. So I can take that bit, call it weapon repository, and move on, right? Names evolve over time, which is what Jason was saying, but they evolve by intent. So one, you can name things silly things with the idea that they get them out of your head to work on them. But as you work on them, ask yourself, what is this doing? What are the methods literally? If I was to describe somebody, what does this do? Go, oh, that's the blah, it does blah. What is it called? Blah, it does blah. That's it. It gives you the name based on the language you talk about it. So there we go. There's the rant I wasn't going to give on this.
And weirdly enough, it's one of those things that ChatGPT can actually help you with your code. I'm doing a function that does all this. Give me a name because I'm blanking badly on it, and it give me 20 names on it, and then just pick one of them.
That's why I'm so lucky. Like with ChatGPT, I swear to God, I said this before. It was built for me. Like of all the people, of all the programmers in the world, the way I work, it's like designed for me because I focus all my intention on clarity of naming and convention. So much so that when I write code and I use Copilot, it can autocomplete half my code because every single name is semantically English. That's how I write my code. So the amount of times I've moved to a different class in a different function, and it's like, oh, you're probably hooking that up to this because all the names make sense logistically and how you're doing. It's like, yes, they do. Click button, does it for me. And I've seen other people have a problem with that because it doesn't know how the language follows. It's just a language mapper, right? So if you're using linguistically clear terms, it's better at mapping your words. So yeah, it's fantastic. I'm getting a lot of value out of it.
So let's jump into the next rant. Is I'm going to name all my variables abbreviations.
Well, you can save space on your hard drive.
No,
take up less characters.
No, it won't. Don't do it.
Save lots of space on your screen too, so that way you could fit more code on there.
Yeah.
If you have long variable names, then you have to use multiple lines.
Yeah.
You can't just write it all on one line.
Yeah, abbreviations will not be your friend when you're trying to work out what the ABH does.
Or when the new person is looking at it and goes, "What the fuck does this mean?" I don't know what or I've had projects where like it was the point where people just ignored the abbreviations. Nobody knew what they meant. They were just there. They were legacy, and the people who had put them there no longer worked at the company. Nobody knew what they were there for. And
there is only one use case where you're allowed to use abbreviations on everything. If
is that
anywhere else, you're going to. But no, that's not an abbreviation. Well, I suppose
link statements.
No. It's when you're building, you're doing one of those hackathons, and you have to get your code into that really.
Oh yeah,
small
that's
little
entirely
tiny.
fair. Yeah,
There's
yeah.
a whole thing, a whole group of people that try and make like games or programs that literally have to fit in these kilobyte level freaking things, and it's amazing to do. Completely unreadable, beyond belief. They've stuck it all on one line.
Here's
There's
my
a
hot tip
abbreviation
though.
of everything.
If you do that, write it normally, then write an obfuscator that runs through it and just does it for you.
And
so
does
much
it
better.
for you. Yeah.
Yeah.
That'll do it.
That's cheating. Don't do that. No, it's not cheating. But anyway, yeah. So abbreviations, don't do it.
Yeah, if you want a more practical rule on abbreviation structure and when to use it, the length of a variable should be inverse proportional to the location it is on the size of your functions. So what I mean by that is, you talk about code in scopes. So as the scopes go up and down, you need more or less context. So if you're at the top of a class, there's stuff up there, and by the time you get down to the bottom, you're like down here in the function. You have no context for what was up there. So if you have something called ZB, you're like, what the hell is a ZB? And you have to like scroll back up to the top to find the ZB, right? But if you're in a loop and there's 4i in whatever, scope-wise, it's small, it's there, you can see what it is, right? So you use it directly proportional to how close or far away it is, which is the opposite for method names. Method names at a high level have to be short names. Thing.do, door.open. But low level, unlock the thing connected to the whatever is perfectly fine. So those two are directly counter to each other. Variables should get smaller when you go down, and methods should get longer as you go down versus the other way.
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. There's another one. It's all in context, what Jason was just talking about. Yeah. Okay,
Yeah,
that's naming.
Short names and lambdas. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. The whole context. And there was a comment earlier about using the var keyword too, and I think it's kind of the same. When you're in a short method like that, I almost always just default to var unless the type is unknown. But
that's more of a debate. People certainly get up in arms on that one. I'm a huge var fan. I use var in everything. Literally, the only time I don't use var is to for loops. I like seeing int there. Every single other scenario I can switch to var, I'll do it. And I know a lot of people don't like it, but I won't call them out for it. But it's fine. Yeah.
You can call me. I don't use it.
Oh,
I don't use var anyway. And
I use it for everything but int. So
I just I put it. I don't criticize people that do. Like the only ones I do is when, again, it's context thing. It's way away from anywhere it's actually used, and I'm like, what the hell is this thing that you're doing? I'm gonna have to look it up and do it. So if it's really close to where you're using it, yeah, I haven't got a problem with it. But I found that when people were using it in one company, it started to just creep, where it was going to places where you didn't know where it was or what it does, and you have to look into it to find it and all the rest. So I kind of put a kibosh on it and went, let's stop using var in these cases. Not to say but for me, I'm a little bit old school in that. I try avoid. I think it was not Visual Studio. Freaking, what's that horrible language called? I'm blanking on it.
Boo?
No, not Boo. The one that was from Microsoft really early on. That was you had to write everything out like you wrote for then.
Visual Basic?
Oh,
Visual Basic.
Yeah, VB.
That
dim in front of everything. It's like
dim. Sorry, dim and
dim it all.
I think the fact that Visual Basic just used to, because I've done a couple of jobs using Visual Basic on Access databases for aircraft parts manufacturing and all the rest, and I frigging hated Visual Basic. So I think dim hurt me, and then when they moved into using .NET and all the rest, I'm showing my age here a little bit, and then var turned up. I'm like, no, it's going back to Visual Basic, and I think it scared me, and I'm like, no, I'm not going through that hell again.
You got no vars in your assets there.
No vars in the assets.
Well, he does in the version of my project because I fixed that. So it's
he automatically switches out the vars. So that's fine. The code's all there. It's really streamlined. And you should look up the asset store. I'm going to start doing it. Sorry. Jason.
My assets also don't use var.
They don't use var either?
No.
Speaking, I'm kind of curious on your thoughts on this, because I mean, you're coming at it from a slightly different perspective with all the art assets and lots of shader stuff and material setup and stuff. How do you feel about, well, one, like renaming, I assume, is much more dangerous for you because you got assets. You can't just go changing things. But two, on just like the naming structures and kind of like rules. Do you have some like hard set rules that you use for all of the asset stuff, or how does that work? Can you talk about that for a second?
Yeah, so for naming, I mostly use what Jason and David said. As for the var, why I don't use it, many junior developers don't know what method does or what it returns or what this value will be. Yeah, so I will always have to check and look at these things. Yeah, because if I
To
use
be
var
fair,
to log,
that makes sense.
yeah,
I agree with you. If I was delivering an asset to people to consume and I wanted less feedback from the asset, it would make sense to
Yeah.
have all of the types exposed. So that's a good point. I hadn't thought of it that way, but yeah, if I was releasing it for people, I probably would break my own rule for simplicity.
Yeah, for I could use think I use var sometimes, for example, where I get component and that is the type that it will be, and somebody that looks at it knows what type of it is. But if there is even slight possibility that they won't know what type it is, and they will have to look it up, I just use type. Yeah. So that's just from the start to that. Yeah. And as for the naming convention, I mostly do the same. Yeah, I don't use abbreviations. I always try to give the method and especially the name of the fields and properties, the names that everybody can think about. And what's also I'm trying to always to do is check if this name is good for people in different for example, if they use different kind of English or if they come from different countries, if this name is appropriate to this field, if it's exposed. Yeah, because sometimes the field can be good for persons that are natural English, and sometimes for people that are learning English can think that it should do something different. Yeah, so I'm always looking it from different perspective as many people will use it. Yeah, so this is additional things. As for the shaders, yes, shaders are a little different, but I'm always also trying to fight the way that you know what they are doing, but they have to be little bit more optimized. So you're always trying to do what David said about these projects, that you're always trying to shrink them as small as they're possible and to work as fast as it's possible. Yeah. Especially,
I
for
will.
example, the
Okay.
shaders like this lava that's flowing behind me. Yeah, so there's things you have to check.
I will say though on the because something that was brought up, I do want to touch on in one of the comments. SGG was talking about readability in terms of it leaves room for ambiguity. Here's my hot take: ambiguity is not a bad thing in software. It is one of those tools in your disposal, like anything else. You should use it when the names don't. It shouldn't matter what the type is. So, for example,
Yeah.
if I had a system called a weapon repository, and I'm returning things from a weapon repository, I might have a laser gun repository, or I might have a minigun repository. Now, conceptually, the object that comes out of that factory is going to be something that has a fire and an equip function on it. And you can optionally have laser gun equals whatever dot gun. And the point is, that gives you more information. But it is my opinion that if you put laser gun there, as I said, every single word in my script is semantically meaningful. And if I write laser gun equals something factory dot create, I'm leaving the word laser gun there because it's useful for you to know further down the script that that is in fact a laser gun. If it is not relevant, if it could be a minigun or it could be anything else, I will write var gun because the only information you should need to consume that rest of that code is the fact that it's a gun. So I use var literally for ambiguity because if I have something called delivery service, whether it's a bicycle delivery service or a motorbike delivery service or a delivery van or a freight system, you should not be making future decisions about your code relative to the fact that you know the super secret information that it happens to be coming from a freight factory. You should be treating that concept, that system that I gave you, with the contract I gave you, which says it is a delivery system. It promises this, it doesn't promise this. Everything past that is not your information. You don't need to know that, and so I'm giving you exactly how much information you need. So ambiguity is a tool in your belt like anything else.
Yeah. Hold on. I got two things. My brain just turned off.
Oh,
the second
and please
I
do
said-
this, drive me insane. It's EY. Every time I see that, I've been meaning to say it to you.
I didn't even realize it's typoed in there. Yeah.
It's been typoed the whole time.
I know how to
I
spell
wasn't
your
gonna say it,
name.
but-
I
That actually, it
I
still
didn't
works,
know what
though.
that-
It
You
still
know what? The other
works.
thing I need is a big picture of you right there. They got pictures of everything else. I don't have a picture of your face to pop up there.
But it still works. You join the story because it is an adventure.
with lots of long-winded
Everybody's gonna tell
stories.
me I
Yeah.
spelled story wrong. They go, that's not how you spell story. It's the English version. But yeah, if you haven't already joined Stories Discord, I highly recommend it. There's always really good chats in there. But I remember now the topic. I mean, where you're going with this kind of reminded me of one of the other three things, and I don't know if we'll get to all three, but I do want to loosely see if we can talk about number three. I guess we'll skip number two, which was preferring interfaces, not just over type checking, but in general, kind of preferring interfaces and knowing when to switch to an interface versus a concrete implementation. I think that it's one of the few things that junior developers don't really do often. Even a lot of like I'd say mid-level and near senior developers don't do often enough. It's something that I think makes a big difference, and it's very easy to do once you kind of get used to it. And you were kind of loosely talking about, exactly this, kind of like having weapons, and you've got multiple weapon types. Do you have laser gun repositories that just return back a laser gun, or is it a VAR that could be some multiple different types? And if so, how does that kind of happen? So in like my personal preference in general is to add an interface the second I have another implementation of something. So if I've got one version of something, as soon as there's a second implementation, I'm almost always going to just add an interface there, assuming that they're being used by the same thing, of course. This could be like a weapon that's a gun that versus a rocket launcher versus a flamethrower type thing, or maybe even at that point, it'd be an item that can be used by the player. It could be that if the player is using a weapon the same way that they're using a tool in the game, like Minecraft or something else, they're just clicking or something. I'm going to set up an interface that kind of deals with all of that and makes it so that no matter what object I'm using, the player is just using something that has like a use interface on it. And I think it simplifies the code and gets rid of all those, like, if it's this, do that. If you end up in a scenario where you're doing a lot of type checking, which is one of the first things that I discovered you could do in C# and got really excited about, like, oh, I can check and see if this is a gun, and if it is, I can do this. And if it's a rocket launcher, I can do something completely different, cast it as a rocket launcher and do rocket launchery things. And I find that if you're casting stuff, there's usually a better alternative. Dave, you look like you've got some right on top.
Yeah, so it's just that it's pointing out that interfaces are related to the code that uses them rather than the code that implements them, is the way I look at a lot of interfaces. So you're talking about gun, and you were talking about pickup. If you look at Unity and you look at it's the slightly older UI system now, but people are still using it. There's a lot of I click handler, I this, and it's a good example of all these. It's I selectable. It's I this, because it does those things. It's related to the code that uses it rather than the code that implemented it, because one of those buttons might have lots of these interfaces on the back end of it, because it does several of them. But you may just want to use that, and you don't want to have all the rest of the GUMP with it. You just want to use that one particular case. I want to use this in this way. This is the interface. So yeah, anyway, I just want to...
Story.
Oh yeah,
You were kind of loosely going with this on the repositories. So
yes, this is my big topic.
Do you think, first off, before you dive into the details of it, how high or important would you rate this in the stuff you should know in software development? For me, this is definitely in the top 10. I don't know if it's necessarily in the top 3, but for sure in the top 10. And I think it's super important that something that people don't. It was one of the things that took me way too long to really realize and understand. I felt like so.
I definitely think. I think it is definitely in the top 10 for most people to know, but I honestly think the number one biggest mistake. Okay, if I was to collate every question I have ever received about Unity and bucketed them roughly into categories of like, what are they really talking about here? Like, if someone's confused about something, they're confused broadly about, like, how do I build an inventory system? How do I manage my players? How do I do my AI? That's actually all really one question. How do I manage information in a way where I'm like querying for stuff and doing whatever? Or if someone's asking, how do I save my game? How do I have user account information? How do I? That's all broadly the category of you don't know persistence works. You don't know saving, right? So if I was to bucket every single question into broad categories, I would say persistence management slash saving slash interfaces slash repositories, that whole topic is probably the single biggest question I get across the board from all Unity developers in all levels of skill. It's named differently, it's phrased differently, but the question is always the same question going, I have data, my game makes it, my game consumes it, and I don't understand where it goes, where to put it, and how to pass it around. That is one question, and it is the one question I get asked the most. So I would say, to your point, for people who are confused in Unity, I would even go so far as to say top 3 out of just sheer, if you truly understood what the repository pattern is and does, people like me would get 50 to 70% less questions.
That is definitely fair. And the repository pattern, I think, was one of the easiest places and one of the first places that I really started heavily using and understanding interfaces and how we could kind of swap out repositories with a different interface, add in new layers, add in a local layer, a caching layer, a remote web layer, or whatever types of stuff. But then also getting back different things by interfaces as well. You need to tell everybody what that is. I mean, I assume that half the people here at least know what a repository is. And then
but
the other half...
I'd be willing to say 90% of them don't know it correctly. To be brutally honest, I normally don't give those hot takes. I normally say, but I will say very clearly, I think 95 or more % of all people, even people who are very confident about it, do not understand the repository pattern. I truly believe, I think I've seen one good video in the entire, I've watched a lot of videos on design patterns. I've seen one that covered it well. Now, I don't know where the link is, it was a long time ago, but the point is, nobody covers this correctly. So I still believe most people are confused about this topic.
Well, then do you want to give the clarification?
Yeah, this is...
You knew it was coming. You're beating around the bush. You're going to have to tell people what it is.
Yeah, well, to be fair, it's going to be the big talk. I'm going to talk about this a lot during the actual conference, but I will give a touchstone on this. I actually have a whole thing prepared for this. So rather than, because people always complain, going, it sounds vague. It's like you don't use practical examples. I'm writing code right now on a project that's probably going to be some of the code I'll show during the GameDev Guild, and so I'll use this as an example. I wanted to demonstrate the relationship between saving information, management and abstraction layers, and so I wanted to come up with a project idea. And I thought, what better than a search engine? In every game ever, there's usually stuff. Players, items, locations, whatever, and normally at some point you're going to have to give people the option to type a word or pick a filter and then get something from a collection of stuff. And 99.9% of the time, it's really slow because people will do some variation of for each in thing where whatever, and you just hope the objects aren't too big. And even worse, when it goes to saving that, I hear the question, okay, but now all of my stuff is everywhere. Some items are in this object, some players are over here. How do I save my stuff? Where do I get it all back and put it together and whatever? All of that is really one problem, and it's called your persistence layer. And the way to explain this is I'm building an app, and again, I'll demonstrate this in a couple of weeks, but here's the broad strokes. If I was designing a search engine, what can we say is the requirements of that application? The requirements are, there are items. Now, am I searching books? Am I searching players? Am I searching swords? Honestly, does it matter? Not really. The requirements of a search engine application is there is stuff and there's a query. And using the stuff, using the query, I return less of the stuff. And then when I have less of the stuff, I give it to somebody to show the stuff. And then a person might click one of the stuff, and based on the stuff they have clicked, I will show more information that they can do stuff with that stuff. They can play it, they can turn it on, they can shoot it, they can do something with it. So here's the thing. That contract, that particular set of rules is business rules, is what we call them. The business rules for this application is, if you give me a string value, then I will give you back an enumeration of something. And that's the only information we need. It doesn't matter where it comes from, doesn't matter where it goes, and doesn't matter where the string comes from. So now for a very practical example of one I made, and I'm going to speed through it conceptually because there's a million topics here. version 1, I wrote a list and I had a string input box and I said type word and I matched the word directly to name. If thing.name equals thing, return thing. That worked. Then I built a UI that maps to this. There's a UI where if you type the name exactly, it matches. But I want to save this stuff, but I don't want to save it in memory. I want to save it to a file. So I replaced that piece of code. And again, every code I write at this point, I'm never changing again. So these are not me refactorings. These are me adding a new thing that replaces the old thing. So version 1 is save to list. That was the repository. The contract was, I give you stuff, you put it somewhere, and I ask for stuff back, you give it back to me. That's the one contract there. So step 1, stuff went to list in Unity. Step 2, version, list went to save file. Then when I called for it back, it came back from save file. So then I did my search and I typed it in and it matched by name. But match by name isn't very good. I want to match slightly better. So now I did a contains match. And again, contract doesn't change. String comes in, items come out. So now it's slightly better. But I don't want to just save to a file. I want to save it something more robust, right? And so what I do is I now call from the web, grab the items, and then return them because there's more cool information. In this case, I'm using a Pokemon API. I can get all the Pokemon searched, whatever else. So I get all the Pokemon. But every time you do that, it's doing a web call. So now I've made it worse, not better. So I want to use the save file, it's faster, but the web file has more information than just the 2 things I typed in the list. So now I do a request, it goes to the web, pulls the item back, saves it in a dictionary. And if it's in the dictionary, it returns one in the dictionary. If it's not, then it goes to the web, puts it in the dictionary. So next time I ask for it, it's in the dictionary. So then I save it to a file. And so next time I load the file, if it's there, repopulate the dictionary. So what I've built is a caching layer. So none of the code for the UI has changed. So then I switched gears. I left this all behind and I went over here. And rather than being an input box, I decided to make a nice Text Mesh Pro input box with its flashy animations and a drop down for autocomplete. And did all of that. Didn't touch the data. It's unrelated to this. Data over here. Then I added support for AI Whisper, OpenAI. So now, rather than typing into the input box, I'm saying words that gets translated, that gets typed in the input box for me. So the contract, the bit in the middle, the actual application rules have never changed. String comes in, items come out. But I've added a new feature to the UI. You can now type and talk into it. Over here, the data gets saved to different sources. And long story short, by the end of all of this, the application I have lets you have 5 different ways of inputting into the input box. It gives you autocomplete search answers. It will find fuzzy match searches. So if you misspell things, it uses all of that on the left side. And on the right side, it will save to cached local files. It will create what's called a soundex dictionary. It'll create what's called an inverse index. And so you can do search by tags and types. So you can search any Pokemon's location, any Pokemon's region, anything across this data set. So this data set is 1,000 entries with all the different facts and fields about it. And it has 0 time lookup because it's using a cached dictionary. And all of those words can be looked up using their aliases. So you can do searches against fuzzy mismatched words and spellings, all sorts of crazy different stuff. And my point is, to go back to the repository pattern, this bit in the middle, if you were to ask what is the code, the logic is, if you give me string, I give you items. And I wrote that code on day 1, and I never changed that code since. And there's a bunch of rules in there that are things like, if string is empty, tell the UI, string was empty. If items came back with nothing, tell the UI, nothing came back. If mismatched, send it back up to thing and sends it back up. So the point is, later on, I could take that information and decide to add fancy animations or pop-ups relative to those messages that got sent, but then nothing changed on the data and nothing changed in the middle. So all of this is to say, my application is using what's called 3-tiered application architecture. There's data stuff, logic stuff, and UI stuff. And I can make a decision about any one of those unrelated to everything else. The repository gets me stuff. And that stuff may come directly from an API. That stuff may come from a file on my desktop. It may come from an API, then to a file, then to my desktop. It may come from, actually what I ended up using by the end of it, memory mapped cache files, which are even more efficient because they keep the actual memory address storage. But that's a whole separate thing. The point is, where the data comes from is completely irrelevant because I say to somebody, get me stuff, and stuff comes in. And then over here, I change my UI 6 times. Between being in editor text box, to being a pop-up text box, to being an animated Text Mesh Pro text box, to being an autocomplete input text box, to being an autocomplete input text box with fuzzy matching, and I kept changing this, and none of this changed, right? So this will make a lot more sense when I have code demos in the GameDev Guild thing, but I just really want to highlight here that people look at the repository pattern, and here's the #1 mistake people make. They think it's a fancy wrapper around data, and you go, I'll get stuff, I'll put stuff in, I'll save, and I'll load. The #1 indication to me that someone does not understand the repository pattern is if they have an interface for a repository with the word save and the word load in the interface. That means you do not understand what the repository pattern is. The repository pattern is, at its core, it is an alias around a list so that an object that may be more complicated than a list can look like an in-memory collection. So it doesn't matter if the collection source is a file, a website, a web server, aggregated data, generated data. To the rest of your application, it's get items or get one item. It is a contract that looks like a list, which means the simplicity of working with a list in memory versus all of this stuff is isolated from the rest of the application. The whole application downstream thinks it's talking to a list. Everything else is a problem solved past the boundary line of the persistence layer. That is the repository pattern, and people do it wrong because they put save on it. If you put save on it, it no longer looks like an in-memory collection. It is giving away the fact that it has changed from an in-memory collection to something that may or may not require saving. The correct answer is to have a normal repository with no getter set, and then you can do a typecast, because typecast isn't evil, it's just something you do correctly. Before you save at the end of your application, you say, if this repository happens to be persistable, save. I don't know what that means. I don't know if it means go to web service. I don't mean it's caching stuff. But at the very end of my application, wherever my items come from, item stuff dot, if is persistable, persistable.save. And I've solved in perpetuity saving whether or not it's to a file, to a disk, to a web service, to a web client, to multiple web services, double caching to a web service and a web client. It doesn't matter because two problems are solved. One thing gets items and an unrelated thing called a persistence layer gets and saves those things. So repository pattern. Yes, it was still the repository pattern from day one. It's a big topic, but we're talking about so many things here. So it's very hard for me to keep it very close because you have to understand philosophically, the repository pattern is the gateway drug to proper application architecture. It is a very big topic. So yeah, it's complicated. I've been trying to figure out how to explain this for the last 2 weeks. That's why I've been coding more in the last 2 weeks than I have been in months because of this presentation coming up. And I've been trying to find a way to condense all of this correctly. So
I think I'm really excited about it. After hearing that, I'm even more excited to see the explanation and start fixing my repository patterns a little bit more. I don't do it often, but I feel like there's definitely some room for improvement. So I'm really thrilled about that. I just dropped the link in the chat as well. That's gonna be super cool. What's up, Dave?
I'm fine.
Dave's like,
I've got my data access layer, I've got my business logic layer, and I've got my presentation layer. It's all the stuff that you were taught at college that
Dave's
nobody
over
ever
there
paid
deleting
attention
the
to.
save method from that interface.
I am not.
I know. Mine has it too, so I'm gonna have to figure out how to.
That's what I'm saying. That's why most people do. I honestly think if you follow any guides online, if you type in repository pattern online, you will see 80% of them have a save function.
Yeah.
Now, to be clear, the actual class repository needs its save and load function class methods, but it's the interface. It's the things you pass around to your system. In fact, I actually go one layer more. I have what's called a read-only repository and then a repository, with the implication that a read-only repository is giving you stuff, but makes no promises you can save stuff, because that could be a web service, but it may not be, right? So I have those 3 tiers. It is stuff that is a read-only repository, then a repository, then a persistable repository. And that means I can make that decision later on in the application if I need to, but I can also hide all of that complexity.
There's
oh
a
God!
Quick call to unit of work.
Please no. We're not. No. Okay, we're not getting unit of work. Is like a whole layer. No, we're not doing that.
That's a cattle prod, and we don't. Yeah, it's.
Yeah, we'll have to talk more about that.
I mean this to be polite as possible. The Unity community is not ready for the unit of work pattern. I'm sorry. Like, most people do not understand the concept of a persistence layer. We are not getting into command query separation, unit of work, transactions. All of that stuff is so downstream that you'd have to be really good at this stuff before we even go near any of that.
You're basically giving Jason Story a prescription to Pepsid for the rest of his life if you were going to start bringing those things up. We're going to do singletons as well at the same time, and we're going to hurt everybody's feelings. And yeah.
Oh yeah.
On other topics, don't put too much nesting in your code. There you go. See, nice and easy.
That's a very good one. You want to just?
I was joking. Come on.
No, I think it's important. Really quickly, if anybody doesn't know what that means, you like the
Google
30-second
search
explanation.
never nester. I'm a never nester. No, search never nesters, because it's a topic where you're going to just have loads of angry people shouting at each other. Basically, don't go too deep. If you're going 5 levels deep in nesting or 7 levels deep in nesting, you're doing it wrong.
And that's with like your
Extract things
tabs and
out.
your curly braces,
Yeah.
right? Like going in an if statement and then another if
Yeah.
statement with
And
a
then
switch.
another if
and-
statement with a for loop below it, and just extract those out into methods. I'm going to keep it really short because
yeah,
otherwise
we
people
don't
get
have time
bored.
for another me debate, so
No,
I'll just say
exactly.
the key word is called cognitive complexity. Research it, follow it. I'm not going to go on a rant on it, but the term for this broad topic is called cognitive complexity, and you want to lower the cognitive complexity of your function calls. There you go.
There you go. You said his name 3 times again. It popped up. But no, extract your stuff out into methods. Check if things are null at the beginning, and just leave that method if they are. You don't want to be there anymore. You don't want to nest it further and go down further.
So you're going to do like an early exit return, and like if this thing is not true, return instead of if this is true, do all the shit in the squiggly braces and the stuff in the next
There you
squiggly
go.
braces.
Yeah, it's a lot of
And
times
is there
it's just
a
swapping
level?
a true for a false and returning out instead of stuff.
Is there like a
what?
number of nested levels that you're good
No.
with? Personally, I'm good with like 1, occasionally 2 if it's really small, and then if it's 3, I start to get a little bothered.
I'm fine with 2. If it starts getting to 3, you better have a damn good reason there's 3 there, and you might have that reason that if it's 4,
Occasionally
then,
there is a good reason, but it's rare.
if it's 4, then you just got your papers and told to go find another job. Yeah.
Usually that
basically,
good reason is like a triple nested for loop or some weird shit like that.
Yeah. And look, yeah, exactly. Yeah, basically you're hitting on an array or something. But multiple dimensional array. No, yeah, look up never nesting. It's an interesting topic. If you find that beginners will nearly always nest. They nest heavily and suddenly their functions become massive. And if you're one of those people that just have these giant methods that nests deep, go and watch a video on Never Nester, and suddenly you will go in and refactor all your code immediately. because
The
you'll be
other
like, "Oh my
buzzword
God,
is
it's so much
guard clause. Research the
Oh,
word
yeah,
guard
clauses.
clause.
Yeah,
That's the other
that's
one to look
another
for.
So yeah, so that's a thing, and I was only going to mention it just to be like, there's a really small thing that I can add. rather
No,
than
that's
go
a good-
into
that's
a
what I
giant
There's no
wanted.
thing.
small topics.
Little
All of
small
these can be
things that are
elaborated.
very helpful.
Yeah.
There's
Make a big
there's small
impact. Like the
topic.
little things that make a huge impact. All right. Well, I think we're going to wrap up for the week. I wanted to really briefly remind everybody to go check out the Nature Manufacturer assets. Get ready for that new lava that's coming soon, and go grab Dave's new assets, including the free one that's linked down there. Just go check it out, grab the free one, and to sign up for Jason Story's Discord, even though his name is spelled all wrong.
Join the
Go in there.
story
Hey,
with story.
if you like these kinds of topics, literally yesterday we had like an hour and a half conversation on the concept of save files. So this stuff happens all of the time in that Discord. So
Yes, that's exactly why I highly recommend it to everybody. The conversations and chats, I just sit there and lurk on them a lot of the time, but it gives me lots of good ideas and stuff to talk about. And then finally, come join us at GameDev Guild in about a week and a half. So it'll be kicking off. There's a free pass, so everybody can go grab that, or there's the pro pass. I think we're going to hand out the keys for all the pro goodies sometime either this weekend or Monday, as soon as I can get it done. So it should be pretty exciting. And the conference should be a lot of fun too. I'm pretty excited about that. Worn out, but excited. Anyway, any final words, guys? If not, I'm going to hit the promo video and we'll head out until next week.
No, go check out the other channels. Join the GameDev Guild. You missed out on talks if you didn't go on Saturday. It was really interesting.
Oh yeah, that was a
There'll be
lot
more
of fun.
interesting stuff. Yeah, it was.
But we'll have a lot more of that. I got a whole week of that coming up. So
Yeah, exactly.
come join us and we'll see you there. All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Guild Conference is right around the corner, starting on May 1st. It's a 5-day conference that offers everything an in-person conference does. We have dozens of sessions on a variety of actionable topics you can use in your own projects. Many of the Game Dev Show experts will be there, along with tons of other speakers like John Riccatello, the CEO of Unity, Rick from Game Dev TV, Thomas Brush, Turbo Makes Games, Chris Lucian, Jabrils, and many more. We also have a full virtual expo hall for you to connect with and network with all the other attendees, speakers, and sponsors. In addition to our Pro Pass, which includes over $2,000 of free bonuses, and our Student Pass, which gives you access to all of the sessions, we've just announced a completely free one-day pass, which gives you access to all of the sessions on the first day. So go check it out, grab your free pass, and join us on May 1st by clicking the link in the